Welcome to the first edition of Sports Gazette's newspaper review. I'm Darren Barnard, and we have with us today Michael Jordan and Peter White. So most of the papers today are focusing on Declan Rice's apology for his RRA tweet. We have the Mail leading with Rice's RRA regret. We have the Times, Rice sorry over IRA message. And with The Guardian, England stand by Rice. Midfielder apologises for apparent pro-IRA post. So Michael, as our lead Irish correspondent for the Sports Gazette, is it unfair to resurface these old tweets for professional football players?
Yeah, very unfair, especially the timing of England playing tonight, and Declan Rice could well be out there in the starting 11. It's definitely unfair in the fact that he was, 15, 16? Whenever he made the tweet. He's still a young boy now, he's 20 years old now. But it also comes hand in hand with the spotlight of being an international footballer, and particularly an England international footballer. We've spoke about whether that would be the case if he was still playing for Ireland with his tweet have been surfaced. Possibly not now, probably not now, but being an England player, it comes hand in hand with the scrutiny of having that large spotlight put on you.
Pete, do you think it'll have any kind of effect on his selection in the England games both tonight and on Monday evening?
I don't think so. No, you've seen Gareth Southgate come out in his defence quite quickly yesterday. He seems to be really close to his players. You've seen it with Sterling before, and he trusts him. I agree with Michael. I think it's pretty nonsensical, to be honest. As a young lad, we've seen it a few times. We obviously had Phil Neville not that long ago when he became the women's head coach at England, and that kind of got brushed under the carpet a little bit after quite a lot of controversy. But he's young. If you looked at the average sort of 15, 16-year-old, I think on social media, you're going to find some probably interesting social media posts that they don't necessarily know too much about, really. Probably, if you looked at mine, you'd probably see some see some issues in there. So I hope it doesn't. I don't think it will, to be honest. I think Michael's right when he says that because of this controversy about him changing his allegiance to England, that's sort of raised the profile of it, to be honest.
If anything, his response to it, to me, shows how mature he is for his age.
Great. Yeah.
Dealing with all he's had to deal with before this, and then, just it adds on to the pressure of possibly putting on the England shirt tonight. It really shows as a 20-year-old just the strong head that he has on his shoulders and his dignified response to it. Yeah,
I think it's already a sign of what you have to deal with being an England international compared to possibly being an Irish international or any other kind of home nation. You get under a lot more scrutiny, don't you, than anywhere else. I think it'd be really interesting to see the fan reaction to it as well over this weekend and the coming fixtures as well, whether there be any kind of a backlash regarding that. In terms of fan reaction, it's also going to be really interesting to see the reaction to Adam Johnson being released from prison today. We have the Sun leading on pedo Prem star banned from seeing his kid. Apparently he will be banned from being alone with his daughter after his prison release today after serving half of his 6-year sentence. So on the subject of second chances of footballers, we've previously seen the likes of Chad Evans now captaining in Fleetwood. Pete, do you think Adam Johnson will get a club?
At the moment, I think it's pretty hard to see that happening. Running in the Mail today is saying that they've contacted a lot of the League One and League Two clubs asking whether they'd ever consider taking him on, and it's been a pretty resounding no. There's obviously the option of going abroad, but it's going to find that pretty tricky, I think, with visa issues and obviously having that on his criminal record. But I don't know, I would never say never. Whether it will calm down in a couple of years or whatever, I don't know. He's certainly got the ability. He's obviously played for England. Something had a couple of years out, but I'm sure that he could do a job in the lower leagues. But I don't know, it'd be interesting to see. I don't know.
It was a good few years before Ched Evans found himself a club in England, and he was cleared of his charges as well. So it's different in that regard as well. It's a tough one because coming from the flip side of it, you could argue if somebody served their sentence, they should be given that second chance, and he has the right to earn a living in the profession that he was in before the charges. But with the pedestal footballers are put on in this day and age, especially for the younger audiences, it's hard for him to justify having that role again, especially within English football. As Pete was saying, if he can maybe get somewhere abroad, that's a possibility, but I don't see that happening for the foreseeable future anyway.
Yeah, he's only 31 years of age, so I'm sure there's a potential for him to get more years under his belt. And as you say, I mean, he's a much higher profile name than the likes of Chad Evans. And we mentioned before the show today about Luke McCormick at Plymouth, the goalkeeper, who's received a lot of abuse, from fans behind the goals for the acts that he's done in his career as well. So it would definitely be interesting to see what the reaction is, with fans off the pitch, and to see how clubs in the EFL and outside of England, how they react to it as well. But there was some action on the pitch last night as well. I'm not sure if people were following it, but Scotland had one of the worst results in their club's history. Country's history. They lost 3-0 to Kazakhstan, and the Mail have a fantastic write-up today about Alex McLeish and whether it is the worst result in their history. We have some results here, such as losing 2-1 to Israel in the Nations League last year, losing 2-0 to Georgia in the Euro 2008 qualifier. So, Mike, where would this rank for you in their worst results?
Well, with this being Kazakhstan's 4th win in a decade, and I remember seeing a tweet last night posted by the Scottish Twitter page. It was Kazakhstan are pushing for a 4th. It makes definite grim reading for Alex McLeish and everyone involved in Scotland. I would say personally, this is the worst results that I can think of. You mentioned some of the results there, but I think this is head and shoulders above that, blows it out of the water a bit for me. And you looked at the draw when it was made, and you thought Scotland had a real chance here. I mean, you've got Belgium in that group along with Russia, who obviously did very well in the World Cup. But you thought, yeah, Scotland could definitely push for 2nd place in this group. After a result like that, absolutely no chance, I would say now.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of discussion before the game about players like Andy Robertson and whether they're truly committed to international game. Do you think that's a fair criticism of the players for these countries like Scotland and Wales and Ireland at the moment?
I think Scotland have just been stuck in the abyss for too long now. I don't really know. Scotland always had this tradition of producing amazing players. Billy Bremner, Gordon Strachan, those sorts of people. Kenny Dalglish, yeah. And they haven't been in a major tournament for so long now. It's just kind of, I don't know, they seem to be being left behind almost. They're not producing the players they were, and they just haven't really done anything. Not even since the sort of James McFadden era when they beat France 1-0, probably about 12 years ago. But if you look at their managerial appointments over the last few years, nothing particularly inspires me. I think they're very, they're struck on appointing a Scottish manager. They've had Craig Levein, Gordon Strachan, Walter Smith, obviously.
McLeish's
2nd time. And they're not really going anywhere. They've been losing to Kazakhstan 3-0. We saw it yesterday. They went 1-up, and you kind of think, oh, that's just a bit of a fluke goal or whatever. But then it's pretty embarrassing, to be honest. I remember when Kazakhstan scored a goal at Wembley, and it was like the whole, everything had gone to pot. But and also the other home nations, obviously, like the Euros in 2016, when everyone else qualified and Scotland did the only team that didn't. I'd be very upset if I was a Scotland fan.
Yeah, and everyone's talking right now, aren't they, about how easy it is to qualify now because of the amount of teams, allowed into the major tournaments. And then there's Scotland, who must, as you say, they must be waking up this morning in Scotland thinking, how on earth has this got this bad?
Did they get a favourable draw as well because of Nations League, supposedly, and then
they have the playoff to fall back on. But I wouldn't be too.
As an Irishman,
as an Irish fan, I would love a playoff.
Yeah.
Well, they put all their eggs in one basket with Michael O'Neill in the summer, which didn't pay off for them. I mean, Michael O'Neill's turning water into wine at Northern Ireland, and I think Scotland were hoping for something similar there. But I mean, Scott McTominay was still on the bench last night, and he might not be everyone's favourite player, but he was part of a 3-man midfield which went to Paris and got a result. So, I mean, Scotland, they do produce players, but as you said, I find personally I don't see Alex McLeish surviving this whole qualifying campaign, and I found his appointment quite unimaginative whenever it was announced. So
San Marino's a massive game now, isn't it? I mean, can't imagine them losing that, but
if they did, even in my eyes, even if they do win, but it's not an emphatic win or a somewhat convincing win, people are already calling for him to leave. I think they'll be screaming even louder if that's the case.
No, absolutely. I think shout out to Stephen McGowan in The Guardian today for shocking Scotland battered by Borat. I think that kind of sums up, just how little is known about Kazakhstan's football credentials. They're more famous for obviously Sacha Baron Cohen's excellent film on them. Well, Scotland weren't the only team playing last night. There was also some club football going on in England. We had Chelsea women were playing PSG in the Champions League. They came off with a 2-0 victory here. We can see in the Telegraph we have a write-up of Blundell scoring along with Cuthbert in the second half as well to send them through to an advantage in the second leg. But the game was tarnished by PSG ultras coming over and with some terrible chants towards the players on the pitch and basically just tarring the whole spectacle of the game. And obviously with the World Cup being hosted in France this summer, do you think this is a real concern for fans of the men's game ruining what could be a really spectacular summer for women's football?
I think it's definitely going to be a concern, yes. Obviously there's been quite a lot of security presence in previous tournaments in the men's game. This might raise issues where that'll need to be the same going into the Women's World Cup. But whilst it is a minority, obviously it has to be taken seriously, but it is also still a minority. It was over 50 fans, I think, at Kings Meadow last night. And I believe the reason that they were there is because they've been banned from the men's and youth games as well. So it's a group which you would hope won't be in strong presence come France, come the World Cup. But I think we just got to celebrate the rise in the women's game. Chelsea had a brilliant result last night, and going ahead into this World Cup summer, it should be a brilliant tournament, I think.
So do you think this is a real concerning time for women's football? Should the focus be more so on the upward trajectory it's been on, or should we be really concerned about what these fans could be potentially ruining this big spectacle?
Well, I hope the minority stays the minority. I'm convinced it will. We've seen the women's game go, increase in popularity recently. We've obviously the Spanish game the other day, 67,000 people there. We've seen 9 countries bid for the 2023 World Cup. Barclays obviously come into the Women's Super League as a sponsor, and I think promoting the women's game is it's a massive thing. Whether it's going to persuade people to kind of go and tarnish the game to a slight more extent, I don't know. Obviously the ticket prices are really cheap to women's game, that might be a factor, but I guess it's a bit too early to say. I'm not really sure at this moment. It'd be interesting to look at the World Cup and see what happens there.
Yeah, hopefully, as you say, it is just a minority and not the majority. What is definitely a really pleasing thing to see is the amount of women spreads and exclusive we're seeing in the papers today, obviously on the back of the Telegraph having their first sole women's sports section. We have a fantastic exclusive interview today with Simone Biles, written up by Molly McElwee in the paper today, about how she says my body's gone through a lot and is falling apart, and it talks about the pressure women have to deal with in sport and the image they have to deal with compared to in the men's game. But do you think these spreads would be given as much time and as much space in the papers if it wasn't for such a slow news week in the men's game?
No, this is the simple answer to that. Whether they should be, absolutely. Simone Biles is a phenomenal athlete, and spreadsheets is what she deserves, really. But it's interesting hearing her speak about as a 22-year-old that her body's starting to fall apart. Obviously, it's a sport which requires a lot of strength and conditioning, and it's a lot of trouble upon the body. But it's also interesting to hear her speak about the pressure she has upon body image itself, and how we spoke about athletes such as Max Whitlock and Louis Smith, and how that isn't the same. It isn't in the same sense in the male game. So I mean, it's really important, especially with Telegraph, to get these stories out. And absolutely, it should come more often than what it does.
We should also flag up there's a brilliant write-up today with Annie Vernon, who was the silver medalist rower, who's talking about the pressure she has to deal with, and with coaches, and how the difference between how men and female are treated in the sport as well. Do you think this is still a massive problem in the women's sport?
The difference between men and women, I guess they're just getting their voice more and more. We've seen it with Simone Biles' piece, just a sort of different perspective, and with the Annie Vernon piece with the rowing. It's an interesting one. I think women are getting their voice more and more, and hopefully they can continue to do that. With the Telegraph, they've got that new women's section, which is really positive, with Anna Kessel heading that, and hopefully that will continue to grow.
Relate that back to the women's football we were speaking about before. It'll be really interesting to see. Obviously, the women's football game has been growing throughout the years since really the previous World Cup. That was really a catalyst in that, and just how big an effect this coming competition will have as well. As Pete mentioned before, the record attendances that's been being set in recent times, and also with rugby, there's been a record set in the England game with England women doing so phenomenally well in the Six Nations. So yeah, women's sport, I feel like people say this kind of in passing that women's sport is on the rise, but it most definitely is, and it's great to see that the media, sports media, is also mirroring that.
Yeah, I know Gabby Logan flagged up 2017 as the year of women's sport. A lot of people have, scrutinised that for not really maybe failing in that, but hopefully 2019 can be that year and really be a chance for the papers to reflect that as well. But I think that just about sums up for our first edition of the Sports Gazette's newspaper review. So thank you, Mike, and thank you, Pete.
Thank you very much.
I'm sure
Thanks, Darren.
we'll see you again soon.